Graypenner was on page 120th of Clive Cussler's new novel when he heard his wife's car finally pull into the garage. He touched his Fitbit and saw the time. 2017. He winced. This is the third time this week that his wife has been late at work. Until 4 months ago, in all 7 years of their marriage, she had never come home late. Gray was not born yesterday or the day before yesterday. The first few times Kelly called to report the delay, he didn't think anything of it. Then he noticed that one evening, when she returned home later than usual, her lipstick was slightly smeared, which was almost unheard of, since Kelly is practically obsessed with her appearance. He was sure he had noticed the foreign scent of aftershave when she leaned in to kiss him, so that night in bed he deliberately pressed himself against her neck as he stroked her from behind with a spoon. He didn't know much about scents, but he knew there was a significant difference between the White Shoulders perfume he bought her and whatever the hell she smelled like. Crap. Gray almost gasped when his red-haired wife walked through the door. At 30, he felt that she was still as beautiful as when he first saw her in college, and his almost convulsive sigh was his usual reaction whenever he saw her after being separated for several hours or more. Entering the house, Kelly smiled to herself as she saw her husband's usual reaction. She knew his reaction was a sincere compliment, and besides, she had to admit to herself that she was turned on by her husband finding her attractive so soon after she had touched another man's lips. "Hey, honey," she said, moving closer to him, kissing him quickly on the lips and turning to head upstairs, her now invisible smirk both confident and condescending. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll be down in a minute." While his wife entered the house and went upstairs, Gray did not say a word, and she did not seem to notice. However, he noted the now familiar smell of aftershave lotion. Not for the first time, he furrowed his brow as he walked up the stairs, anticipating the impending confrontation that had to happen soon if he wanted to save his marriage. At this point, Gray was confident that his wife had not yet crossed the line in her relationship with handsome Paco Rabanne, as he mentally called her potential seducer, but in his opinion, she was getting closer. For 7 years, Gray feared that his beautiful wife would one day realize that she had married a man unworthy of her from an aesthetic point of view and would try to make amends. Gray did not consider himself an ugly man, but in his opinion, he had an average appearance and could not compare in any way with his stunningly beautiful wife. The snake that invaded the Garden of Eden was named Johan Wegman. Kelly worked as an assistant vice president for an international telecommunications company. Johan was a well-built 40-year-old blonde man who had moved to work from the company's headquarters in the Netherlands about 6 months ago. For the first 2 weeks, Gray heard far more than he wanted to about the Dutch settler, before Kelly went completely silent. Gray became suspicious. "Hey, is that new Dutch guy still working in your office?" Gray asked over dinner one night as Kelly talked about her day. "Yes. Why are you asking?" She answered, somewhat embarrassed. "For weeks, he was the only one you talked about." "And now it's like he's completely disappeared," Gray said. "Well, he works in a different department. We rarely see each other," she said, her face turning slightly red. "Huh," Gray muttered, stuffing his mouth with food and noticing that his wife had just lied to his face. The late evenings began soon after. Kelly felt a physical attraction to the 6'3", 102-pound Dutchman from the first moment she met him. In addition to his physical attractiveness, he exuded a self-confidence that almost bordered on arrogance. He spoke 3 languages and had dark blue eyes that, according to Kelly, looked into her soul every time he looked at her. If she was being honest, she had to admit that when Johan smiled at her for the first time, she felt butterflies in her stomach. In fact, Kelly and Johan did not work in different departments and communicated quite often at work. Within a couple of weeks after Johan joined the company, the two of them began going to lunch together. Kelly loved her husband and did not even think about the fact that she and Johan were starting a relationship. Johan, for his part, was well aware that his relationship with Kelly was developing because he gently pushed her to do so. Johan knew that this woman was married, but he believed that she would let him know if he went too far. In his country, extramarital affairs were not anathema. 2 weeks later, they were working on a project that they didn't finish by the end of the day. Johan suggested that they start the project again in the morning or just spend a little extra time in the evening in the office. Her smile told him everything he wanted to know. She quickly called Gray at his office and said that she would be late for a couple of hours. He noted to himself that this was the first time she had been late in all the years of work in the company. But since he also had to be late at work sometimes, he did not complain and said that he would cook dinner that evening. She admired how attentive he was. They left the office at 7 o'clock, although they finished work at about 6:30. Both kept track of time. Working, or rather staying up late, became a habit for the couple, who initially spent their time talking. Then it turned into touching, hugging, and kissing. Kelly was well aware that she was teetering on the edge of a slippery slope, but she liked that she had a husband and a boyfriend. In fact, she was so caught up in her feelings that she either didn't notice or didn't care that her husband noticed. After graduating from college, Gray got a good position with a good salary at a small local telecommunications firm. Kelly, who had the same education as Gray, began working in a less senior position at an international firm. They planned not to have children until they were 30. It was also soon decided that Kelly would be the first to return to online college to earn an MBA and advance within her company. After she gets her master's degree, it will be Gray's turn so that he too can advance in his career. Kelly completed her master's degree in 4 years and soon received a promotion that put her salary and position in the company above her husband's. He was very proud of his wife and was pleased that their career plan was working. Carried away by her own financial and personal success, Kelly lost sight of their overall marital plan. When it was Gray's turn to get a master's degree, she said they should instead use the money to buy a house in which to raise their children. Gray was unhappy that his dreams didn't come first, but had to admit that buying a house for their future family was a good idea. He could always go back to college in a couple of years, she reminded him. Kelly always had something serious in mind for the couple to spend their money on, rather than Gray's MBA. He didn't want to seem selfish, so he always agreed with his wife's wishes. Kelly's ego really liked the fact that she was the main breadwinner of the family and that she had the biggest job of the couple. She began to perceive herself as the more equal among two equal partners. Kelly had butterflies in her stomach as she walked down the stairs. She loves her husband, but she needs Johan. She needs to feel him inside her. She needs to spend nights with him. She needs to cuddle with him after sex. But she could not cheat on her husband and must first tell him about it so that it does not become cheating. She knew that he loved her as much as she loved him, and that he would give her this one weekend, this license to have sex on the side. He never refused her anything. Dinner. In the microwave. You just need to turn it on for a minute, Gray said as Kelly appeared downstairs. Thanks, babe. I'll bring everything now. Can we talk? She asked. Gray looked up from his book. Dirk Pitt. We'll have to wait? Gray realized that Kelly had something important to say. Did this have anything to do with what he wanted to talk to her about soon? I want a free pass this weekend, Gray, Kelly said hesitantly but clearly. Gray froze in his place on the couch. His brain began to work intermittently. He hoped he didn't look as dazed as he felt. He felt like his insides wanted to burst out. Sorry? He asked, realizing that he had actually heard his wife correctly. I need to spend the whole weekend with Johan Wegman, she replied. We have feelings that need to be tested. Once. Only one. I love you, Gray. Not him. And after this weekend I will come back to you and spend the rest of my life showing you how much I love you. Gray felt even more nauseous as he realized that Kelly had ruined their marriage with her question. However, he decided that this tragedy needed to be played out to the end. What if after this weekend you decide that once is not enough? What if you decide you need him for more than one weekend? If you decide that you need him more than me? It will not happen. I promise, she said quickly. Is it true? And how can you promise such a thing? 12 years ago you already promised me. You swore that you would leave everyone else for me. and now you are going to easily break that promise." She blushed again and began to look anywhere but directly at him. "I need this, Gray, and I know you love me enough to give it to me," she whispered. "To be clear, Kelly, you don't need it, but you definitely want it, and you're hoping I'll be stupid enough to give it to you." "This will not happen," he said again. "But you are not my property, so if you really want to, you can do it. Just remember that for every action, there is an equal reaction." "Thank you, Gray." "I'm glad you understand," Kelly said. "No, baby, don't try to pretend that you misunderstood me. I just told you to do what you think is right, and then I will do what I have to do," he said. "As you say," she replied. When Gray walked through the door the next evening, Kelly was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. As he entered, he noticed a small bag standing near the door. "She's definitely dressed for the evening," he thought, noticing that she was wearing one of her sexiest dresses, a cornflower blue, mid-thigh length one that showed off a fair amount of cleavage. "You seem pretty confident in yourself," Gray said, putting his keys and wallet on the shelf. She smiled flirtatiously. "I am confident in my beloved husband," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "Now kiss me goodbye and have a good weekend." "Don't sulk," she said. Gray wanted to grab her arms and shake her until her head fell off. Instead, he gave her his saddest smile and shook his head. "God, how I loved you, baby," he whispered, turned and went upstairs. Although she realized he didn't kiss her goodbye, Kelly didn't notice Gray's use of the past tense of love as she left the house. Her thoughts were already several miles away, where Johan was waiting for her arrival. She felt like a 16-year-old virgin going to her first prom. Kelly and Johan had been planning their weekend for the past 2 weeks. After 3 months of increasingly frequent kissing and caressing, they decided it was time to see where their relationship would lead. Johan didn't mind that Kelly was married. She told him that she and her husband were working on some issues in their marriage. She met Johan in the hotel lobby, and they checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Johan Wegman. We went up to our room and threw our bags. Before leaving the room, Johan asked Kelly to spin around in front of him. He whistled softly in response and then pulled her towards him for a deep, passionate kiss. His tongue searched and quickly found hers in her mouth. She moaned deeply. God, this man knows how to kiss, she thought. Their table at an upscale steakhouse was booked for 7 o'clock that evening, so they had to unpack and hit the road. Dinner was amazing. They drank a bottle of good wine, but only one each, because they both wanted to be on top. For dessert, they each took ice cream. During the meal, they talked in low voices, enjoying each other's company. They touched each other tenderly. To any observer, they looked like a very loving married couple. On the snack table next to Gray's reclining chair were the remains of a medium-sized pepperoni pizza and 4 empty beer bottles. Despite the fact that Gray was a fairly experienced cook, he, of course, had no intention of cooking that evening. After some thought, he decided that pizza and beer were the ideal food for the evening when his wife would be giving her body to another man. After finishing his meal, Gray went upstairs to the bedroom with several large garbage bags. He spent the next 30 minutes haphazardly bagging all of Kelly's clothes, then went downstairs and piled them up by the front door. He handled the jewelry and toiletries a little more carefully, putting them in a box and also placing them by the door. Somewhat satisfied and indescribably angry, Gray went downstairs, put the DVD in the player and sat down to watch his favorite movie of all time, the Mel Brooks classic, Young Frankenstein. Kelly and Johan barely had time to return to their room when he pressed his lips to hers. She grabbed him by the neck and they stood there for about a minute, kissing passionately. From what she saw through the pants of his suit in the office, Kelly believed that Johan's assets were a little larger and thicker than her husband's, especially considering Johan's size advantage. He was 15 centimeters taller than her husband and 18 kilograms heavier. Johan studied Kelly's body very carefully, slowly removing her clothes, kissing her neck, shoulders, and chest as they were exposed. Finding herself completely naked, Kelly reached for Johan's belt with trembling hands. Everything happened too quickly, much faster than she expected. Johan praised his partner very much as they lay intertwined, but did not make a single move to satisfy his partner. She was disappointed, but knew they still had a lot of time. After a 20-minute break, Kelly tried to get her partner interested again, knowing that her husband sometimes needed just that long to get back into the game. She was again disappointed. The next day, Saturday, the couple had a full day of active recreation, planned before another luxurious dinner and subsequent carnal pleasures. Kelly hoped that the previous evening was just a misunderstanding, and of course, today everything would be different. Gray spent the entire Saturday afternoon alone, not even turning on the TV until the sunset. No matter how he looked at his dilemma, he saw no way to remain married to his wife. He knew he still loved her. It didn't go away overnight. But he couldn't get over the disrespect she'd been showing him lately, and he'd never be able to trust her again, expecting her to use her when she wanted to. Some other guy will again demand free passage. On the screen in front of him, there was a rerun of the show, Leave It to Beaver, but instead there could have been porn if Gray wanted it, and there it was. He took another sip of his beer and stared straight ahead, thinking back to happier times with Kelly. In truth, Gray never understood how they ended up together. As undergraduates at Arizona State University, they took several courses together, but Gray had no idea that this amazing girl might know who he was. She always seemed to have a small circle of admirers, but early in her freshman year, she took a seat next to him in his accounting class. She seemed to go out of her way to flirt with him during class, and completely shocked him by inviting him for coffee when class ended. Of course, the young man agreed. They were practically inseparable for the rest of their college years and got married about 6 months after graduation. A few months ago, Gray was sure that their relationship would last for a long time. However, recent events showed cracks in their marriage, and then Kelly did the unthinkable. Kelly lay in bed next to the sleeping Johan, wondering how much sucking up she would have to do to get her husband to forgive her for the untimely weekend. She had heard the words her husband had said to her when she had told, about the free pass, but she knew Gray loved her too much to let one weekend ruin their marriage. However, she also never thought that she would have to worry about her husband while she was with Johan. The day spent with Johan had been wonderful. He had excellent manners and a magnificent personal charm, but upon returning to his room on the second night, his charm seemed to have deserted him again. He was again selfish and clumsy, despite the fact that the woman again gave him the opportunity to doubt himself. She wouldn't even call what they were doing sex. Yes, Johan tried to be physical, but it was more like moving a saw in and out than anything else, and he didn't care about his partner at all, in her opinion. And that's why I pissed Gray off? She thought to herself. God, what a fool I am. After sex in the dew, have a nice brunch, Johan smiled as he and Mrs. Wegman left the hotel. All this time, Kelly was kind and smiling. They kissed passionately in the parking lot. Kelly considered it the most passionate part of the weekend, then got into their cars and drove home. Kelly used the hour-long drive home to clear her head and strengthen her position in a long-running dispute with her husband over her free passage permit. She was confident that Gray would eventually give in, despite his initial anger and threats. In the end, she almost always got her way. At worst, she thought, she will order sexy lingerie and stiletto heels, and maybe a leather bustier. She couldn't help but smile, thinking about how easy it was to trick a man around her finger. Kelly drove the car into the garage and turned off the engine. She checked her makeup again in the rearview mirror, took her bag from the back seat, took a deep breath, and walked into the house with her head held high. "Hey, I'm home!" she shouted, entering the kitchen from the garage. She waited a couple of seconds for Gray to greet her, which would have been normal, but she was disappointed. She heard the big screen on in the living room and went in, irritated by what she thought was her husband's childish behavior. Gray sat in his reclining chair, watching a baseball game. Looking up from the screen for a second, he nodded towards his wife, not paying attention to her. Needless to say, she was unhappy. "Is this how you plan to play this out?" "Okay." She pouted and left the room. What the hell do all those bags at the front door mean?" she shouted. When Gray didn't answer, Kelly walked over and opened the package. He heard her gasp, then heard more bags being opened. "Damn it. It's not funny, Gray." "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted. "To make it easier for you to move out when I give you the divorce papers," he answered, surprising her by silently approaching her almost closely. "No divorce. There will be no divorce, you idiot," she said. "We talked about this. This is just one weekend. One. We've been married for 12 years. You can give me one weekend. First of all, we didn't talk. It was you who spoke, and I listened. You told me that you take permission to have sex on the side. When it was my turn to speak, I said I wasn't going to accept it. It's not my problem that you didn't take me seriously. We are married. That means no permits, ever," Gray said. "Will you actually divorce me because of one weekend out of the entire time we were together, and all the time we will be together in the future?" she asked. Now there was panic in her voice. "We won't be together in the future since you did that. I told you this." "Which, I'll do what I have to word, didn't you understand?" Gray growled. Tears began to flow from Kelly's eyes. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, Gray did not move closer to his wife to console her. "You cheated on me with another man. Just because you told me about it first doesn't mean it's not cheating, especially after I told you not to do it," Gray said. "You didn't tell me not to do it. You said I could make my own choice," she said, trying to turn the argument in her favor. "And be responsible for the consequences of your actions. It seems you can only remember what you want to remember," Gray said. Kelly literally stood still for several seconds, looking at her things in the bags. She was breathing heavily. "Well, I'm not moving out. This is my home, too," she said. "Okay, but since your things are already packed, you can move your junk to the guest room." "I'm staying in the master's room," Gray said. "Okay," she grumbled and carried the bags up the stairs. "Will you help me?" "I've already done my part of the work," he answered. "I've collected my things." Gray returned to the living room and continued watching the baseball game. He heard his wife stomping up the stairs and muttering something. Finally making it downstairs, Kelly plopped down on the living room couch and began flipping through the Sunday newspaper that Gray had placed on the end table next to where she usually sat. She began flipping through the newspaper noisily, making sure it crackled every time she turned a page or changed position in her seat. "Don't you at least want to ask how my weekend was?" she pouted. "Why do I need it? I believe you had sex with him several times. Isn't that what people do when they cheat on their husbands?" Gray asked. "Well, we also went to some places, did some things, and ate at some nice restaurants," she whined. "Cute. Happy for you," Gray said. "Maybe one of your friends will be interested." "But your husband, not yet a husband." "No." Gray noticed that his wife didn't seem nearly as excited as he'd expected, especially after she'd made such a fuss about her departure. The fact that she wanted to talk about non-sexual experiences suggested that Johan might be more of a loser than a stud. But that's not my problem, Gray thought. Gray spent time Monday separating bank accounts and making financial maneuvers necessary for his pending divorce. He wouldn't be able to get an appointment with the family lawyer he'd chosen until a week later, so he knew he'd have to live in the same house with Kelly for a while. Kelly spent the day avoiding Johan. She was well aware that they were on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the weekend success. She knew that their relationship had changed forever, and not for the better. She really wanted her husband to understand this and return to her, so that with Gray's help she could ward off Johan's future advances. Kelly's life suddenly became very difficult. Kelly was wondering what to do, talk to Gray again or just move on as if nothing had happened, hoping that her husband would eventually cool down. She chose the second option as the path of least resistance, not wanting her husband to call her a cheater again. After some time spent looking at the situation from all sides, Kelly was forced to admit that the word cheater sounded much more accurate than loving wife. She shook her head sadly, wondering if she would have looked at the situation differently if her weekend had been a resounding success rather than a dismal failure. Gray didn't say a word to Kelly when he returned from work and when they sat down to dinner. When he finished eating, he mumbled a quick thank you and cleared away his plate. "Sorry, Gray." "I'm so sorry," Kelly whined as Gray walked into the living room. "After all these years, I thought you loved me enough to give me a weekend." "Do I love you enough? I would think that after all these years you would love me enough to not ask permission to cheat on me," Gray said. "How selfish and deluded do you have to be?" The next day at work, things went even worse for Kelly. 5 minutes after she entered her office, one of her best friends at the firm walked in and closed the door, which was not a very common occurrence in the office. "Please tell me you didn't spend the weekend with the Dutch Thor," Emma LaSalle asked in a half-whisper, even though the door was closed. Kelly's eyes opened wide. "Was he bragging?" "No, no, no," she croaked, her face contorted with shame and anger. "I suppose if it doesn't come from you, it does from him," Emma said, "but I didn't hear it from him. I heard several girls whispering about it in the break room while I was drinking coffee. If they are whispering at 8 in the morning, then by noon, the whole office will be talking about it. Now this can no longer be hidden." Kelly put her head in her hands. Emma watched as tears fell onto her desk. "Yes, you have become that special one that all women hate, and every guy now wants to get his piece. Well, was it good?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "This is the biggest problem. Did not have. I made my husband very angry and for—" "What?" she asked. "Johan is big, handsome, charming, and an absolute dummy in bed. He's barely bigger than Gray, and in bed he's not even half the man he is, but he considers himself God's gift to women." Emma's shocked look turned into one of concern. "So, how much time and apologies does it take to win back your husband's affection?" Emma asked, without the slightest hint of a smile. "I wish it were that simple," Kelly replied. "Gray constantly talks about divorce, 7 years together, and he keeps talking about divorce, directly. No, I'll think about it. No consultations, nothing. I thought he would just be angry, but he is beside himself with rage. I've never seen him so reckless. But I warned him. Yes, but if he didn't approve of it, your warning means nothing. You're a smart woman and you really can't deny that you knew how this could end," Emma said. Coincidentally, Gray said almost the same words to Kelly 2 weeks later when she called in tears after being served divorce papers at the office. "You told me I could have sex with him." "He said I could," she sobbed into the phone. "No, I told you that this is your choice, but it will have consequences. You got what you wanted, and obviously, it didn't matter what I wanted," Gray said. A few weeks later, Gray received a call from his father-in-law and mother-in-law, asking him to talk to their daughter and think about reconciliation. Gray loved his relatives and always got along well with them, so he tried to gently disappoint them. "She says she made a mistake, and you don't want to talk to her. You don't let her explain everything," his father-in-law harshly accused. "You're above this, Gray. Did she make a mistake? Did she really call it that?" Gray said this with more than slight irony in his voice. "Well, she never actually told us what the mistake was, but after 7 years, don't you think you should show her some courtesy?" said Ken Clayton. "She didn't tell you the whole story, Ken." "I wouldn't call it a mistake that she gave herself permission to have weekend sex with a coworker. I warned her there would be consequences," Gray said. "Oh, no, no, she couldn't be that stupid," Ken cried. Gray did not consider it necessary to respond to what he was sure was a rather rhetorical remark. I'm really sorry," Ken said. "I do not know what else to say. I won't bother you anymore." The day after his conversation with her father, Gray groaned when he saw Kelly calling him. "Another whine is coming," he thought. "I'm sorry, Gray, that my father called. I think you realize that I wasn't very open with my parents. It's not something you admit to unless you have to." I never thought that he would call, and I never thought that you would rat me out, she said quietly. I didn't rat you out, but I told the truth, he answered without emotion. Yes, she sighed. Kelly and her lawyer tried to delay the divorce, but given that Gray filed due to irreconcilable differences and the absence of children, it took 9 months. Kelly couldn't believe Gray didn't give her a second chance after her mistake, as she repeatedly called it. The mistake wasn't just about having sex with another man, Kelly, he explained one evening when she tried to convince him. Long before you cheated with him, you had an emotional affair. You neglected my feelings. She disrespected me in the worst possible way. When did you stop loving me? Kelly held back tears. Once upon a time, when she cried, Gray tried to console her. Now he accused her of trying to break through her tears back into his heart. I know you still love me, Gray. Why can't we try to make peace? Yes, I still love you. That's why it hurts me so much, Gray replied. But it seems to me that you don't love me as much as I love you. I would never think about cheating on you, ever. But I can't believe that you won't do it again when a second man attracts your attention. There will be no second man. I promise, she quickly intervened. There shouldn't have been a first one, Gray grumbled. You promised this when you swore an oath to me. Oh yes, she whispered. During the divorce, Johan asked Kelly out on several dates, as did several of her other work colleagues. The woman was talked about in the office, and a few weeks after the incident, she was called to the HR department. We do not have a policy prohibiting employees from making acquaintances, but we have always asked our employees to exercise some discretion. If half the male employees are talking about how you spent the weekend, playing family with Johan Wegman, and half the female employees are talking about who's next on your list, that's not a good situation. If the fuss doesn't subside, you may be asked to move to another office. I've been told that Maine is very beautiful this time of year, the HR director said. A day later, Johan again found himself in Kelly's face and asked the woman on a date. After the HR director's warning, she was not in the mood. Well, baby, your husband is divorcing you. We won't even need to leave town for the weekend, Johan said. Don't you understand the hints? She snapped. I ruined my marriage for mediocre sex that I just wanted. Mediocre sex. I was such an idiot. Now go away, Kelly screamed. 2 weeks later, Kelly agreed to move to North Carolina. By the time she left, everyone in the company knew that Johan was not the stud he thought he was. A month later, Johan transferred again to the Amsterdam office. He is handsome, fit, and every Saturday morning he walks through the aisles of the grocery store as if he were sluggish, as she noticed from a couple of meters away. He never seemed to notice her, which was the norm in her life. Margaret Scanlon, known to her close friends as Peggy, worked as a 5th-grade teacher at a local elementary school. Her appearance was average. Her physique, as she considered it, was average, which meant she had nothing to attract a handsome, obviously lonely man. She is 29 years old, and in a few weeks she must cross the threshold of 30, with no prospects of leaving bachelor life anytime soon. Peggy wondered how a man as attractive as him could still be single. He looks to be about 30. He doesn't come across as a player, and he looks lost, perhaps broken. Graypenner doesn't have a wedding ring on his left hand, but Peggy knew he was single before she even looked at his hand. The items in his cart said everything about his marital status. Pop-Tarts, frozen pizza, macaroni and cheese, beer, and grilled meats. Nothing says singleness, and maybe even divorce, like these products. Many people call Peggy Mouse. She has short, wavy, light brown hair, large brown eyes, and light, almost pale skin. She was 5'5" tall, had average breasts, decent legs, and what she considered her best feature, a muscular round ass. Personality-wise, she would describe herself as a quiet person. In college, her friends considered her an ideal partner, thanks to her friendliness, loyalty, and ordinary appearance. She had first noticed the man while passing by a few months earlier. For some reason that she still can't figure out, She continued to notice him, and about 2 months ago she started paying closer attention to him. Although it was completely out of character for her, she considered introducing herself to him. If only, "I know this may seem a little cavalier, but I am Peggy Scanlon. Would you like to have a cup of coffee with me?" Peggy asked a few weeks later, approaching the man. Gray stepped back and looked closely at the woman who had just verbally addressed him. Sure, she wasn't stunning like Kelly, and not many people were, but there was something about her look that made him agree. Something in her eyes made him want to know more about this mysterious woman. For the first time in the last 2 years, he treated a woman in more than just a friendly manner. "Yes, I think that would be great," Gray answered readily. Peggy Scanlon was an open book. Moreover, it was easy to read. In her 29 years, she hadn't dated often, and never seriously. She seemed smart and well-read, and he listened carefully as she talked about her past. Having finished her story, she sat silently and waited for him to tell about his past. She looked carefully into his eyes and decided that he was single because he was divorced. There was pain in his eyes that only someone who was deeply wounded could know. She watched him think. She saw that he was trying to figure out exactly how much he should tell about himself, and he told almost his entire story, while she sat in tense attention. When he finished, they both sat in silence. He sighed heavily and looked at the woman as if the whole weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. "Sorry for dumping all this on you," he said, looking up. "You are the first person I told the whole story to. They told me that I have such an influence on people. I'm also pretty good with small children and dogs," the woman said. Gray chuckled. He felt very comfortable with this stranger, almost like he did with Kelly before they went their separate ways. Gray made a date for the following Friday evening. On their third date, they had sex for the first time. Peggy tried to hold out longer, but turned out to be the weaker partner. There was something incredibly sexy about Gray's calm, reserved demeanor that she couldn't resist, even though he never made any overt sexual maneuvers. After a pleasant dinner at a Hungarian restaurant, Gray invited Peggy to his apartment for coffee and alcohol. At first, they sat next to each other in a love seat in the living room, and then Peggy leaned towards Gray and pressed her lips to his. 10 minutes later, they were lying naked in Gray's bedroom. Over the next hour, he tenderly made love to the woman. He noted to himself that for the first time after the divorce, he was making love with someone. In other cases, sex was just sex. During classes, he always kissed a woman. What? She muttered, clinging to him after they finished. Silence. "We'll have plenty of time to talk later. What are you doing in the next few decades?" he remarked. Peggy smiled tiredly at him, and he pressed his lips to hers. A woman who was a bridesmaid 4 times finally found herself in the spotlight after a year. They subsequently had a couple of children, a boy 2 years after the wedding and a girl 2 years later. Unlike her predecessor, Peggy never forgot her vows. And although Gray will never know it, Kelly will never forget this lesson either. A few years after moving to North Carolina, she remarried and remained faithful to her second husband for 15 years until she caught him cheating. She admitted to herself that she finally understood all the pain that Gray had endured and wasted no time in divorcing her second husband. Kelly always took care of herself and still went to the gym regularly. At 50 years old, she was still an attractive woman, unmarried, alone, and approaching 50 years of age. This was something she never imagined, even in her wildest dreams. Her second husband was 10 years older than her. He had no children, and he did not want to have them with Kelly. Now it's too late. She laughed out loud, or rather barked. Gray wanted 2 children, she wanted 3. So, by this time, all 3 of the couple's children would already be in their teens. She and Gray would attend various school and community events, sports, music, parenting. Both high school and college graduations are just around the corner, followed by weddings and grandchildren. And all this was lost, for the sake of mediocre sex. What a dumbass she was. She shook her head sadly for what must have been the 1,000th time. A few months later, on the other side of the country, Gray and Peggy Penner, along with their 15-year-old son Reggie, sat in the gym of the local high school and watched their 18-year-old daughter Phyllis receive her diploma. Peggy squeezed her husband's hand, and they exchanged glances with happy tears in their eyes. Gray leaned over and gave his wife a quick peck on the lips, causing his son to wince in teenage embarrassment. "Well, that's enough, you two. Not here, and not now," he whined. The parents smiled at him, then at each other, and both raised their eyebrows. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.